Everything you were taught about the birth of civilization has the order backwards. What if humans didn't start farming to eat better? What if they started farming to keep the party going? It's not just a wild theory. It's what a 13,000-year-old cave in Israel is quietly telling archaeologists. Right now, you're probably drinking something, or you're about to. And you have no idea you're repeating something 10 million years old. Older than writing, older than farming, older, actually, than humans. Every textbook tells the same story. First came farming. Then people settled down. Then they built civilizations. Beer shows up at the end, as a reward for progress. But caves, monuments, and 10-million-year-old brain chemistry suggest that story might have the order backwards. Alcohol didn't come after civilization. Civilization may have come after alcohol. To understand why, we have to go back further than farming, further than humans. 10 million years ago, there was no beer, no wine, and no bread. Just fruit. Fruit falling from trees, rotting on the forest floor, while wild yeast quietly turned its sugar into tiny amounts of ethanol. Picture a primate moving through the trees. A smell drifts up from the forest floor. Faint, sharp, unmistakable. It stops, it follows its nose, and it finds a meal. The primates that could smell fermentation had an advantage over the ones that couldn't, because that smell meant one thing: ripe, sugar-rich, calorie-dense food. Evolutionary biologist Robert Dudley called this the drunken monkey hypothesis. Not because our ancestors were getting drunk in the trees. The alcohol levels were far too low, but because their brains were learning a simple rule. That smell means food. That smell is good. So, long before any human ever brewed a single drink, our ancestors were already primed to seek it out. That's the instinct. But an instinct isn't the same as a habit. So when did primates go from finding alcohol by accident to making it on purpose? Fast forward to 13,000 years ago. Rekafet Cave, Israel. Archaeologists found stone mortars carved directly into the cave floor. Inside them were microscopic traces of wild barley and wheat that had been soaked, sprouted, and fermented. That's not an accident. That's a recipe. And the people making it weren't farmers. They were hunter-gatherers. No fields, no stored harvests. Every grain had to be gathered by hand from the wild. If the goal was simply survival, none of this makes much sense. It was far too much work for far too little food. So why do it? The leading theory is that this beer wasn't made for everyday meals. It was made for gatherings, for feasts, for rituals, for celebrations that brought scattered groups together. And that leads to a much bigger question. What if people didn't start farming to eat better? What if they started farming to keep the party going? About 1,000 years later, something even stranger appears. Göbekli Tepe, in what is now southeastern Turkey. Massive carved stone pillars, some weighing several tons, arranged in giant circles, built by people who, according to traditional history, shouldn't have been capable of a project like this. There was no agriculture, no cities, no governments directing the work, and yet someone organized hundreds of people to quarry, carve, and move these enormous stones. Then researchers found something unexpected. Inside large stone vessels at the site were chemical traces consistent with fermented grain. Not scraps, not leftovers. Enough to suggest large communal gatherings. This wasn't accidental brewing. It appears to have been intentional. Archaeologists are still debating exactly what the evidence proves. But one idea is difficult to ignore. These monuments may have hosted enormous communal feasts, and fermented drinks may have been one of the reasons people gathered there in the first place. If that's true, alcohol wasn't just a byproduct of civilization. It may have helped organize people before civilization even existed. This is where researcher Patrick McGovern enters the story with an idea known as beer before bread. His argument is surprisingly simple. Bread takes serious effort. You have to grind the grain, knead the dough, and bake it. Beer is almost easier. Soak the grain, Leave it alone. Let fermentation do the work. If brewing had enough social value, then growing grain suddenly became worth the effort. Grain stopped being just food. It became something people used for gatherings, for rituals, and for social status. Now picture two different versions of history. In the first, people worked the fields so they could eventually make bread. In the second, the celebrations came first, and the fields existed to keep those celebrations going. Rakafet Cave and Göbekli Tepe don't prove McGovern's theory, but they do make it much harder to dismiss. By around 7000 BCE, over in China, at a site called Jiahu, jars appear containing the residue of a fermented mixture of rice, honey, grapes, and hawthorn. The pattern repeats. Different continent, same idea. Not an accident, a recipe. Made again and again on purpose. Then, in ancient Egypt, alcohol stopped being a curiosity. It became part of everyday life. The workers who built the pyramids at Giza were paid partly in beer, around 4 to 5 liters every day, not a bonus, part of their wages. Think about that for a second. If you were hauling massive limestone blocks across the desert, and someone offered you either a bag of coins or 5 liters of cold beer. Which would you choose? For many workers, the answer was obvious. Beer wasn't just valuable because it contained calories. The Nile's water was often unsafe to drink. Thanks to the brewing process, beer was often the safer option. In many cases, it helped keep people alive. Its importance didn't stop there. The Egyptians believed beer was a gift from the god Osiris. It was offered in temples, used in burial rituals, and prescribed as medicine. Doctors mixed herbs into beer to treat stomach pain, infections, and many other illnesses. One drink served as a paycheck, a safer source of water, a meal, a medicine, and even part of religious life. By this point, alcohol wasn't simply part of civilization. It had become one of the systems that helped civilization function. So maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Instead of asking why humans started drinking, maybe we should ask why humans cared enough about alcohol to organize so much of their lives around it. A piece of rotting fruit, a cave in Israel, a mysterious stone circle that made far more sense once researchers discovered the brewing vessels. None of this proves civilization was built for beer. But it does suggest something we rarely consider. Alcohol wasn't just along for the ride. It may have helped create the reasons people gathered, cooperated, and eventually built something permanent. So the next time someone raises a glass, they're doing more than having a drink. They're repeating a habit that began millions of years before the first city was ever built. Back on a forest floor, with a small primate reaching for a piece of fruit that had been sitting there just a little too long. The only thing that's changed is that we stopped waiting for the fruit to fall. If this deep dive into human history caught you off guard, hit subscribe for more stories that challenge what you thought you knew about the world.